Gun Rights Radio Network has the best pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights podcast available on the net. The podcasts are absolutely free when subscribing using iTunes or Zune Marketplace. Or if you want, you can just listen from the website. Make sure you visit gunrightsradio.com to subscribe. Podcasting freedom, one episode at a time.
Okay, welcome to Power Factor. I'm Steve.
I'm Rick.
Today we're going to talk about reloads. So there's reloads IPSC style and there's reloads IDPA style. In IPSC, we're basically looking at two types of reloads. Either the slide's locked back or it's not locked back. It's sometimes, I think, called a speed reload. I think IDPA calls it an emergency reload or something like that. You can't really technically do it.
Well, the slide lock reload is the emergency
Right,
reload
okay.
in IDPA. That's the standard reload. And then there's also, in addition to that, two kind of slightly different styles of retention reloads. And that's where you retain the magazine that's partially depleted, and all the other reloading techniques will involve just ejecting the spent mag and disregarding it.
So we'll start out with the IPSC reload. Okay, before we talked about placement of gear, your holster, your gun, and magazine pouches before, but I just want to kind of demonstrate here the necessity for this. I have my magazines here. Since I'm shooting limited division, I'm allowed to have my magazines in front of my body center line. In production and single stack, they have to be behind basically this bone point here. When I come down to the magazine, I want to have my arm here relatively straight to the magazine. So you can see this magazine here, this mag pouch is angled at a fairly steep angle. So the first magazine is here. As my hand moves back, my elbow comes up, so you can see the angle of the pouches actually increases as I go around to the magazines. So in terms of the reload, you shot it, your last shot, your slide is either locked back or not locked back. Now in my particular case, my gun will not lock back the slide. I've disabled my slide lock, and I've also modified the followers of my magazines to not lock the slide back. The reason for that is actually twofold. One, in limited division, there's a potential, because of the way that the magazines and followers are designed in the double stack, that it's possible to lock the slide back on the gun if you don't disable it with 1 or 2 rounds left in the magazine, which you don't want to do. So what we do is basically modify the follower on the magazine and also modify the slide stop on the gun to not lock the slide back. So magazine in the gun, that's not locked back. The other reason for doing this is that it's possible that if the slide is locked back and you ram that magazine home and hard and it over inserts, it can possibly break the tip of the ejector off on the gun. So kind of the rule of thumb in limited and an open division is to disable the slide lock on the gun so the slide does not lock back. However, if the gun does lock the slide back, and I can actually force this, after you do the reload, as the hands come up back into a shooting position, the weak hand thumb can come up and just simply hit the slide release on the gun and chamber a new round. Now again, like I said, mine will not do that, so I never have to deal with that problem. So I fired my round. It's key here that when you do this, that you get your thumb down quickly onto the mag release as this hand's coming down to the gun. So what that's going to look like is that. Okay, so as soon as I realize that I'm firing my last round, I'll bring my finger down to the magazine release and drop it and come down to the next magazine. The other thing you'll notice here is that I actually flick the gun into my hand when I'm doing when I'm hitting the mag release. My thumb's not long enough to get onto the mag release button, and I also do not like the extended mag release buttons that you'll see because of the fact that sometimes we'll start with the gun laying on a table or something of that nature. You'll come down, hit the gun, it'll pop the magazine, and the magazine will pop out. So I just basically keep it minimal here. I don't think there's really that much time lost in flipping the gun and doing this. So if you fired your round, you shoot, I bring the gun, flick it in my hand, hit the mag release. This hand comes down to my next magazine. I keep the gun high in my line of sight. So literally here at this point to the target, I'm almost keeping the trigger guard of the gun in line with the target. Magazine comes up. When I grab the magazine, I grab it with my finger up the spine of the magazine, almost touching the tip of the bullet, and I look at the base at the mag well of the gun. It's very critical that you do that. You don't want to look downrange at the target. You want to keep the gun high, look at the mag well, look the magazine into the gun. As soon as you confirm that the magazine is in the magazine well in the gun, then look forward back at your target, rotate the gun back into position. If you have to drop the slide, you can do that with this thumb here, and then fire next round. So another thing here is that I mentioned about having your gun locked back. In limited and open division, you're not so much going to see that ever happen. In fact, you don't ever want to see that happen. We're trying to manage the number of rounds that we have in the magazine with what we're shooting, so we'll typically find a spot during the course of fire where you want to do your reload. In production and single stack, you still don't want to run your gun dry, but it seems to happen more often there because of the fact that you only either have 8 or 10 rounds in your magazine in your gun. But the point basically being is that you don't really want to have it happen. If it does, though, that's where you're going to do a slide lock reload. So this is what your magazine reloads are going to look like. Gun comes up, keep it in line of sight.
I'm going to talk about IDPA reloads. Steve covered the slide lock reload in the USPSA segment and discussed the undesirability of having to do slide lock reloads in USPSA. In IDPA, the slide lock reload is actually the preferred reload, and it's the one that's done most commonly during a course of fire when the clock is running. So in USPSA competition in the high cap guns, oftentimes the slide lock feature is disabled, as Steve explained. In IDPA, you always want your slide lock to work. Sometimes if a gun doesn't lock back consistently, it's an issue with the magazines. It could be a dimensional issue with the slide stop itself, but you want to make sure that when the gun is empty, the slide does lock back. It's just a little lefty feature. As Steve explained, when you're doing a right-handed slide lock reload, the slide stop itself generally falls underneath either the strong or the weak hand thumb. If you're left-handed and you have your thumbs on the opposite side of the gun, you've got to come up with an alternate method of dropping the slide. That can be, I've practiced over the years, tripping the slide release with my trigger finger as I'm reloading up underneath with the weak hand and tripping it that way. What I've decided on for my purposes is just doing the slingshot method, which is come back over the top of the slide, pull it all the way back, and just let it go. It's a universal technique, regardless of where the slide stop is located, how easy it is to reach or whatnot. You can just release it that way. Any gun, it'll work that way. It is a bit slower because after reloading the gun, you've got your hand very near where it's going to be for your final shooting position, and you've got to remove your hand from that position, get it over the top of the gun, load it, and then get your hand back in the shooting position. So in that sense, it is a little bit slower, but I found it to be very certain. The gun runs every time. I don't fumble or fiddle around with it like I have when I've tried to use various digits to do it. Another possible technique, if you've got front cocking serrations, is as you insert the mag this way, release the slide like that. And it keeps your hand down here underneath the gun where you need it to be for your firing grip anyway. So that's just something, pick a technique, do a little practicing, decide which one you like, and stick to it. The other reloading styles you see in IDPA are the what I call retention reloads, and that is the tactical reload and the reload with retention. The feature of both of those is they're performed when there's a round still in the chamber and the mags are going to be exchanged while the gun remains loaded. Tactical reload begins with a first move, going to the belt for the reload, bringing it up to the gun, doing the exchange at the gun, and then stowing the magazine, the partially spent magazine that came out of the gun. The reload retention, with retention, the first move is from the gun to the pouch or the pocket where the spent magazine is going to be stored, then going to the pouch for the reload to reload the gun. So the difference is, and some of this is just, it's competitive in that which one can be done most quickly, and then there's also some tactical thinking behind it in that the reload with retention, your shot-to-shot time is quicker because once you go to your belt, you dispose of the spent magazine into your pouch or pocket, then come back up to the gun with your reload. So it's just a single time to the belt and back to the gun. The tactical reload, you have to go to your belt twice. You go to the belt first to get your reload, do the exchange at the gun, and then go back to the belt with the spent magazine to stow it. But the advantage is that the gun is only loaded with the single round that's in the chamber, no mag in the mag well for the shortest amount of time, because we're doing the exchange here at the gun. So let's say I've got 3 rounds in the gun. I've got 3 rounds in the gun only for that moment am I downloaded to a single round in the chamber. Whereas on the reload with retention, if the reload takes, let's say, 3 seconds to accomplish, this whole 3 seconds now, there's just that single round available to me. So it's just a matter of what is it you're trying to accomplish, trying to get the gun reloaded as quickly as possible while stowing that mag, or do you want that gun downloaded to the minimum amount of time?